Alrighty, we've got ourselves an interesting new project here. This right here is a 2019 Smart EQ ForTwo, of course, which is the only version they actually sold in the US. They never sold the ForFour here. This car has a bit of an interesting story. So from what I know that the owner has provided me with, some logs of codes and stuff that the dealer gave him, it appears that this car has a known glitch, and this is something that I found out with a little bit of research on these. Apparently these cars are known for a number of different glitches related to the battery management system and such, but this one in particular is quite egregious, I would say. So the issue with these is, well, so let's backtrack a little bit. A lot of you might be asking, why isn't this car being fixed by the dealer? It should be under warranty. And the answer to that, in my opinion, should be yes, it should be under warranty. However, Mercedes, and by extension Smart and any of their other sub-brands, I don't think there's any other sub-brands besides Smart, but Mercedes on their EVs has a stipulation in the battery warranty that the desiccant filter has to be changed yearly. And if you don't do the yearly desiccant filter changes, they'll void the battery warranty. So that's the case with this car. Its battery warranty has effectively been canceled due to lack of desiccant filter changes, which is, in my opinion, it's a really dumb policy to start with. Basically, no other EV that I know of on the market has a serviceable desiccant filter. It really shouldn't ever have to be changed if things are working the way they should be. I mean, the amount of moisture that should be getting into the pack shouldn't be enough to actually saturate a desiccant filter over, I mean, we're talking many, many years, the life of the car. If there were enough moisture in there to cause that much of an issue, it would be, you'd have much more major problems than just needing to change the desiccant filter. I guess you could argue maybe it's a way that Mercedes can catch those problems early, but I really don't think so. To me, it seems like it's just a way for them to write in, you know, kind of a fine print policy on their warranty, where if it's not followed, they can cancel the warranty kind of at will. And that service to change the desiccant filter isn't really, what would be the right word? It's not really made obvious to the owners of the cars. I've known of a couple different situations, not necessarily on the Smarts specifically, but actually on the Mercedes B-Class, where people had their warranties canceled for lack of desiccant filter changes. And they were never told that it needed to be changed. And if I recall correctly, it didn't even show up in the service intervals in the owner's manual. So in my opinion, this is a pretty egregious issue. So if you happen to have a Smart or Mercedes EV, make sure to get your yearly desiccant filter changes done. Otherwise, you'll get screwed, like this guy did, unfortunately. Anyway, so moving forward with that, so we know now that the battery warranty has been canceled on this car. The issue with it, and this is kind of another weird, I would almost say poor design choice by Mercedes. When these cars are built, the battery management system, or the BMS, has a built-in countdown timer for the number of cycles for the contactors. So the contactors, I'll show you what a set of contactors look like. A set of contactors looks something like this. The ones in the Smart are not quite the same, but it's basically just a big relay. You provide power to the coil, and then your larger contacts close, and that's what connects the battery to the rest of the car. Mercedes builds in a countdown timer for the BMS that starts with some value, and then it counts down to 0. And once it reaches 0, the battery management system disables the contactors. It won't let them close anymore, which, you know, kind of sounds like a dumb thing to do to start with. Here's where the glitch comes into play. Apparently, it's a known issue that if you use a mileage tracking device that plugs into the OBD2 port, it can cause that counter to set to 0. And that's the case of what happened with this guy. He had, I believe it was a Metro Mile insurance, which they give you a little OBD2 dongle that you plug in, and then it tracks your mileage so that you get whatever, a lower insurance rate if you don't drive very much. But that's a known glitch that can cause that contactor counter to set to 0. And unfortunately, once it gets to that point, the car basically becomes a brick. The BMS will no longer let the contactors close, and now the car has no power. As far as Mercedes is concerned, the contactors are not a serviceable component. They don't open up the battery to perform any kind of repairs. So their solution in this case is to replace the entire battery, which if I remember correctly, I think their quote to put a new battery in this car was somewhere in the neighborhood of about $18,000. Which is just, obscene. It's really insane. So, what I did is I did a little bit of research. I found some places that can perform a reset on the BMS to basically reset the contactor counter back to what it would have been when it was new, and then that fixes the problem. We still have to remove the battery to do that. So we'll have to drop the pack out of the car, take the BMS out, and then send it off to one of these companies that can do that reset. There's only 2 that I know of that are in Europe. There's none that I could find anywhere in North America. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to ship the BMS all the way to Europe. But it'll still end up being, a repair that's about 1/10 the cost of replacing the whole thing instead. So anyway, I still haven't confirmed that that's the actual failure mode, but that was what was in the code logs that the owner gave me that the dealer provided him with. So we're going to get it pulled into the shop here. I'll use my forklift wrecker attachment. We'll get it pulled in, we'll hook up our code reader, and we'll take a look at what pops up for error messages. All right, we've got the Smart pulled into the shop here. I have a jumper pack hooked up to it to provide power. And I went ahead and pulled the codes on it and confirmed our initial suspicion. Whoops. We want to look at the faults. There we go. So we can see we have 6 different faults all related to the same thing. Frequency counter for switching cycles of contactors. Which has reached its final value. The actuator is blocked. So essentially, the BMS on this car is now blocking the contactors from being able to close because the countdown timer for it has reached 0. And once it reaches 0, it just won't let the contactors close anymore. And of course, Mercedes won't replace contactors on one of these. Their only solution to that particular issue is to swap the whole battery. And of course, as we discussed before, Mercedes has essentially canceled the battery warranty on this car due to the lack of desiccant filter changes. So now it's up to us to fix it, and I have a game plan to go forward with that. It might be a little bit more tricky than I initially thought, because one thing that I didn't anticipate is the car's actually so short that I can't actually fit it on the lift. The lift arms just don't reach. So I could maybe move it a little bit. Nope, can't move it back either. Yeah, there's just no way to make it fit on the lift. So we're gonna have to come up with a different solution to actually get the battery out of the car. More than likely what I'll do is I'll probably put it on ramps, and then we'll use perhaps a combination of floor jacks or maybe the forklift to actually get the battery out of the car. But that'll be the next challenge to tackle. Alrighty, so here's our setup. I've got the front wheels sitting on a set of ramps, and I have the rear sitting on jack stands on the axle tube on either side. So that should give us sufficient clearance to drop the battery out from under the car. And so that'll be the next step, is we'll have to pull out, there's some plastic panels and stuff underneath, and then we should be able to disconnect all of the high voltage stuff and unbolt the battery and just drop it straight out, pull it out from under the car, and then open it up to remove the BMS. Alrighty, so I guess first things first, we've got to disconnect everything. So we already have our negative terminal disconnected on the 12-volt battery, and we also have to disconnect the high voltage, the disconnect for which is located underneath behind this little foam cover that pops off. There's that out of there, and then you can see it's just that orange doohickey with the green handle, so we'll unclip it, pull the green handle until it pops out, and then that's the disconnect removed. Alright, it's a little bit tight under here, so you'll probably have to bear with me a little bit on the camera angles, but what we got to do is remove these plastic panels. So there's one on each side, and then there's also this one up here kind of at the front half of the car. Alrighty, that's all those panels off. There's also a plastic panel on the bottom of the battery, but that can stay in place for the removal. We don't actually have to remove that. But we are going to have to make all of our electrical disconnections. So of course we already removed the interlock, but we need to unplug all of the cables and the communication data lines, as well as our coolant lines as well. So let's do that next. Alrighty, so up here at the front of the battery, there's only a couple things we have to disconnect. We have a couple of coolant lines, inlet and outlet. There's two ground straps, one on either side. And then we've also got this kind of coolant valve, or I think it's a coolant heater actually. It's got a 12-volt input to it, and it circulates the coolant through it. I don't know that we need to, I guess we could remove that, but it's probably easier just to disconnect the coolant line from it, and then we can unplug it. There's also a bracket back here that attaches these cables to the battery enclosure, and then it goes over the top, and then it is also connected on the other side, so we have to unbolt that connection as well. So we'll go ahead and do all that stuff real quick. First things first, clamp off the coolant lines so that we don't have to purge a bunch of air out of the system. As always, this makes things a whole lot easier. Alright, so that's both of those clamped off. We'll go ahead and remove the clamps. So I didn't realize it at first, but this coolant line actually has kind of a quick disconnect fitting. It's a little bit hard to see because the tabs are hidden inside of the hole here. But by pushing on either side, I can get it to unclip. And then pull it out of position there. So that one's unplugged. Disconnect our coolant heater here. There we go. Okay, that's unplugged. Now I've got to remove our connection point back here for the cables. Okay, that one's off. And now for our two grounds. All right, we should be all clear here at the front. now we'll move to the back and disconnect everything over there. Alrighty, so we're here at the back side of the battery, and there's very little space for me to actually film anything, so I'm going to show you everything that I've got to disconnect. I've got to disconnect our main high voltage connector there, which basically just connects right to the inverter on the drive unit, which is above my head right now. And then we have a couple of data connectors over there on that side, and we've got that other harness bracket that we have to remove, and that's pretty much it. There's not really any space in here for me to set up my tripod, so at least where you'll be able to see anything. So anyway, yeah, that'll just have to do it for now. All right, I got everything disconnected. This was definitely a challenge to get some of these connectors off, because there's just no space to stick your hands in anywhere to get the snaps off. This gray one in particular was really difficult because the snap faces on the other side and you just can't get enough of a grip on it. I ended up having to take a set of needle nose pliers kind of over the top just to get enough pressure on it to unclip that one. And then the big high voltage connector was pretty tough too. It actually uses basically the same connector you'd find on a Nissan Leaf battery. But again, the snap is like just on the wrong side of where you can actually fit your hands in here anywhere. So yeah, that was definitely tricky. But anyways, we got everything disconnected there. So now we should be good to go to drop the battery out. Okay, so we have everything disconnected from the battery. Now it's time to remove it. And the game plan for that is we're going to use this pallet jack in combination with a pallet. Since the pallet jack doesn't actually go high enough all the way to contact the battery, we're going to lift it up all the way until we're supporting the battery on the pallet. We'll remove all the bolts, get the battery unbolted. We'll lower it down on blocks just above the level of the pallet. We'll remove the pallet, and then we'll put the pallet jack back underneath again, take the battery up off the blocks, remove the blocks, and then bring the battery all the way down to the ground with the pallet jack. And that'll be our way to actually get it out of here. So anyway, it'll be a little bit tedious, but since the car is too short to physically fit on a lift, it's really our best solution here. So we'll go ahead and get that going and get the battery pulled out of the car. Alrighty, it's time to pull the lid off the battery. We've got quite a combination of fasteners. We've got a bunch of these larger E12 external Torx fasteners, 8mm standard hex nuts, and then we've got a bunch of T25s around the connectors here on both sides. So let's get to removing all that stuff. All right, we've got all the fasteners out. Now it's time to pull the lid off. I think upon further reflection, I probably didn't need to remove all of the nuts because it appears those are attached to this separate plate that the lid is sort of attached to. And then that whole plate should come off all together with the lid. Or perhaps not. Yep. I guess we did need to take them off. I'm not sure how those connectors on that other side are supposed to be removed. Perhaps there's a connector on the back side I have to get access to. Oh yeah, there we go. So I can remove this connector back here. There we go. Yeah, so there's just a connector on the back side right here that I was able to take off. I'll set the lid aside here. And there we go. There's the internals of the battery. And what we need to remove is this component right here. That's our BMS. I'm sure Mercedes has some other fancy name for it. A BMC. Okay, so I guess that's their name for it, is a BMC. Same difference. But yeah, you can see everything that we've got here. Here's our desiccant filter that supposedly needs to be replaced every year. Which of course, in my opinion, doesn't really need to be done, but again, I could go on a whole long tangent about that. These batteries that Mercedes used on the Smart are kind of neat in that they're pretty modular. There's just 3 modules that are just all connected in series, and it's a pretty simple setup. And yeah, anyways, for all of its failings, I do have to admit that this thing's pretty easy to take apart and gain access to compared to, say, the Tesla packs that are all completely glued shut. Those are a nightmare to take apart without destroying the lid. So it's kind of nice to see something where you actually can take it apart without, you know, spending a whole lot of time and effort on trying to preserve the part without damaging it. So good on that. So now, yeah, our next step is we've got to remove that BMS or BMC. Alrighty, we'll go ahead and get started on removing the BMS here. So we just have a whole bunch of different electrical connectors. I'll just go ahead and unplug each one of these. And by the way, it's worth noting that these are all indexed, so you can't accidentally, you know, plug the wrong one into the wrong position. They all only fit wherever they fit, so no need to mark them or anything. And there's actually this one here that's unpopulated. So we've got all those out. And then we've got this other connector on the side here, which I believe to remove that we pull up on this tab. I can't actually remove that one quite all the way without unbolting it, so we'll go ahead and do that. Just two screws here. There we go. Might have to remove the whole bracket here as well. I can see there's 2 fasteners on top. Are there any on the bottom? I think there's just one down here. There's one top. There might not be any way for us to remove that without taking this bus bar off, so let me check with that real quick. So I think I can actually just move this bus bar out of the way. It's just clipped in to these plastic housings. And yes, this is insulated. Just flex that up. And there we go. Yeah, there's another screw hidden behind there. That's why we couldn't get it out. But anyway, there's the BMS removed. And we'll go ahead and get this thing shipped off so that it can be reprogrammed. Alrighty, so I just got the BMS back from Germany. The box was slightly smashed up, but it looks like the BMS itself is unscathed. I'm in a bit of a rush to get this thing put back together. This thing took quite a bit longer to get here than I expected. But yeah, I've actually got to get this car put back together, make sure everything's working properly, and then I'm going to load it up on a trailer, and I'm actually headed south to go and do some other stuff, but I'm going to drop the customer cars off while I'm at it. So yeah, not something that I normally do, but it just kind of worked out that way with this whole deal. But yeah, like I said, I'm in a bit of a rush, so I'm probably not going to go too into detail putting everything back together, but it's basically just the reverse operation of what we did to pull it out. So it'll be pretty straightforward, and I'll probably just kind of set you guys up on a tripod for a time lapse. All right, it's all assembled. Time to get it back in. Getting it lined up might be a little bit tricky, but there are some sort of alignment pins. You can see the one up here that sticks down, and that actually lines up with this hole right here. So I might actually have to move the battery that direction just a little bit to line up. Yeah, so I'll just have to position it a little bit, get it lined up, and then we should be able to jack it up into place and get it bolted in. Alrighty, we've got everything assembled. Last step is we're just going to connect the 12-volt battery. Oh, there goes the windshield wipers. And let's see if we've got signs of life. There we go. I had some kind of screw up where I forgot that I had left the car in neutral before, and the car wouldn't actually start up. and I was kind of struggling to get it back into park there. But we're actually on. Let's see. There we go. Now we're on. I did hear the contactors clunk just before I turned on the camera. I can hear the AC compressor going. So we're in drive now. Let's see if we've got movement. Oh, parking brakes on. Look at that. The ABS is freaking out there. But how about that? Well, let's get the car off of the jacks and everything and take it for a drive. Alrighty, car's back on the ground. I got everything underneath put back together. Let's go ahead and see how this thing drives. I'll try and get you guys set up on the dash here. And let's go. Oh, that's funny. The backup camera shows up on the mirror since there's no screen for it anywhere. That's kind of funny. Well, how about that? It seems to work pretty good. Got a pretty decent amount of regen, actually. More than I would have expected. It's got a little bit of spunk. Whoa. Alrighty. Well, that's sweet. Alrighty, well, that's gonna do it for this one, folks. Like I said, I'm in a bit of a rush, so I've got the car loaded on the trailer here. I'm gonna get it strapped down and start heading south. But just to wrap things up with the video, what's the moral of the story here? Whatever you do, if you have one of these smart cars, do not use a mileage tracking device for insurance or whatever. That's what causes the problem that this car had. And another thing that I don't know if I mentioned before, but another really common problem on these cars is actually the batteries getting bricked. If you have one of these that you maybe don't drive very often, or it only gets driven seasonally, or something like that, if the 12-volt battery goes dead and the car sits for a long time with a dead 12-volt battery, it'll actually put the battery pack into effectively junkyard mode, and it starts draining all of the cells, and it can get to a point where it'll just drain all the cells basically to zero. So you don't want to destroy your high voltage battery by doing something like that. So if you ever let your Smart sit for any period of time, keep a battery tender on that 12-volt battery or something, and I would recommend probably just replace the 12-volt battery every 3 years. Don't wait until it goes dead, just replace it, and that way you won't have a problem. But anyways, yeah, this turned out to be a successful repair. Took a lot longer than I expected to be able to ship that BMS and then get it back. If I ever do any of these in the future, I'd like to see if I can figure out a way either to do that reprogramming process myself or find somebody domestically here in the US that can do it, that can do a quicker turnaround, because this was, I probably, between the time that I shipped the BMS out and the time that I got it back, probably took a month at least. It was a long time. So anyways, don't be in the same situation that this one was in. But if you like seeing these kind of videos, feel free to hit subscribe, and I've always got more stuff coming in the shop, so hopefully I'll have some other interesting stuff in the future. Thanks for watching.